Mr. Carpenter, please call the roll.
Senators Aguilar, Baumgardner, Cook, Coram, Court, Crowder, Donovan, Finberg, Fields, Garcia, Gardner.
Excused.
Guzman, Hill, Holbert, John, Jones, Kagan, Kafalis, Kerr, Lambert, Lundberg, Marble, Martinez-Humenick, Merrifield, Moreno, Moreno,
Excused.
Neville, Priola,
Excused.
Scott, Scott,
Excused.
Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Tate, Todd, Williams, Zinzinger,
Here's Moreno.
Moreno,
Priola.
Priola, Mr. President.
Here. With 33 present, 0 absent, 2 excused, we have a quorum. Senator Quorum.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the journal. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the reading of the journal for Thursday, January the 11th, 2018 be dispensed with and that the journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You have heard the motion. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the motion is adopted. Senate Services.
Correctly printed, Senate Bill 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, and 62. Senate Joint Resolution 2. Correctly engrossed, Senate Bill 27, Senate Resolution 1.
Third reading of bills. Will the clerk please read the title to Senate Bill 27?
Senate Bill 27 by Senator Smallwood and Todd and Representatives Kraft, Tharp, and McKean concerning the enactment of the Enhanced Nurse Licensure Compact.
Senator Smallwood.
Mr. President, I'd like permission to add a third reading amendment, a technical
Very technical.
amendment to Senate Bill 27.
What are the magic words? I move. Senator Smallwood.
Yeah, we move, the Senator and I move Senate Bill 27 on third reading.
And now ask permission for.
And we'd like permission to run a third reading amendment.
Please
Colleagues,
explain to the chamber why we need a third reading amendment.
we apologize. I have copies here for you. All we are doing is capitalizing the word compact.
In the title.
Yeah,
In the title.
page 1, line 102. So it's in the actual bill title.
Very controversial.
Permission has been requested to offer a third reading amendment.
Sorry, Andy, we should have let you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and permission has been granted. Senator Smallwood, Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. Happy Friday, everyone. And at this point, we would like to move Senate Bill 27 and ask for an aye vote
Would you like?
as amended.
Would you like? Nothing's been amended yet. Would you like to move Amendment L001?
Oh, okay, we already spoke on this.
You got permission to
Oh, now
offer
we,
an amendment.
thank you, Mr. President. Now I would like to move the amendment L001 and ask for an aye vote.
Excellent.
So simple, but I thought it would.
Is there any discussion on Amendment L001? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Amendment L001. Are there any no votes? Senator Jones. Senator Kerr. With 31 ayes, 2 noes, 0 absent, 2 excused, Amendment L001 is adopted. To the bill, Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now I would like to move Senate Bill 27 as amended and ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 27? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Bill 27. Are there any no votes?
I have no control.
With 33 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 2 excused, Senate Bill 27 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Almost everybody. Senator Garcia, Senator Guzman, Senator Baumgardner, Senator Coram, Senator Jones, there's only 2 others that aren't on there. Senator John. You're already on, John. And Senator Marble. Now we have 35. Consideration of resolutions. Will the clerk please read the title of Senate Joint Resolution 2?
Senate Joint Resolution 2 by Senators Marble and Williams and Representatives Buck and Harrod concerning the commemoration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Joint Resolution 18-002 and request it be read at length.
Mr. Carpenter, would you please read Senate Joint Resolution 2 at length?
Senate Joint Resolution 2 by Senators Marble and Williams and Representatives Buck and Harrod concerning the commemoration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Whereas the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15, 1929, graduated from Morehouse College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948, graduated from Crozer Theological Seminary in 1951, and received a PhD from Boston University in 1955. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's faith, resiliency, and commitment to justice became known worldwide through his speeches, writings, and actions. And whereas Reverend Dr. King declared that the moral responsibility to aid the oppressed did not stop at the edge of his street, town, or state, when he wrote, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And whereas Reverend Dr. King withstood attacks on his home and family, among numerous other threats and setbacks, standing firm in his conviction that although the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. And whereas Reverend Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott, a 13-month protest beginning in 1955 against the segregated city bus lines. And whereas the Montgomery bus boycott led to the integration of the Montgomery city bus system and is widely credited as the beginning of the civil rights movement in America. And whereas in 1957, Reverend Dr. King was elected president of the South Christian Leadership Conference, an organization formed to provide leadership for the burgeoning civil rights movement. And whereas between 1957 and 1968, Reverend Dr. King spoke more than 2,500 times, wrote 5 books, as well as numerous articles, led protests, helped register African American voters, was arrested more than 20 times, was awarded 5 honorary degrees, was named Man of the Year by Time magazine, and became the symbolic leader of the African American community, as well as a world figure. And whereas, on August 28, 1963, Reverend Dr. King directed the March on Washington, wherein more than 200,000 Americans gathered in the name of equality and civil rights, and which culminated in Reverend Dr. King's historic "I Have a Dream" speech. And whereas the leadership of Reverend Dr. King was instrumental in bringing about landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited segregation in public accommodations and facilities and banned discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which eliminated remaining legal barriers to voting for disenfranchised African American voters. And whereas in 1964, Reverend Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his tireless and selfless work in the pursuit of justice for African Americans and other oppressed people in America. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's 13 years of nonviolent leadership ended abruptly and tragically when on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's life and work continue to echo in our lives as we strive to reach the lofty goal he set when he said, let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's birthday is a federal holiday in the United States and a state holiday in the state of Colorado, which is celebrated each year on the third Monday in January. And whereas on Monday, January 15th, 2018, we celebrate the 32nd anniversary of Reverend Dr. King's holiday. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate of the 71st General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the House of Representatives concurring herein, that we, the members of the Colorado General Assembly, hereby encourage appropriate observances, ceremonies, and activities to commemorate the federal and state legal holiday honoring the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. throughout all cities, towns, counties, school districts, and local governments within Colorado. Be it further resolved that copies of this joint resolution be sent to President Donald Trump, Honorable Governor John Hickenlooper, the Congressional Black Caucus, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, and the members of Colorado's congressional delegation, Senators Michael Bennet and Cory Gardner, and Representatives Diana DeGette, Jared Polis, Scott Tipton, Ken Buck, Doug Lamborn, Mike Kaufman, and Ed Perlmutter.
I say to you today, my friend,
Colleagues, you can be seated for this if you want.
so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Oh, what we would give to have that man among us today. How we need him. How we love him. How we cherish every speech that he has ever given. And those words will live on in all of us. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta on January 15th, 1929. He was destined to rise up in the spirit of Wilberforce and Lincoln and take up that same banner for the cause of liberty and justice. This time, the fight would be waged against segregation and racial discrimination. Dr. King went forward with unyielding conviction that God had created all men equally, taking his stand and strongly proclaimed that it was up to good men of conscience of every color to act selflessly and speak truthfully without guile in order to bring about the end of segregation in the United States. So it is that each year on the third Monday of January, Americans commemorate the birth and life of Martin Luther King. As benefits the occasion, we remember his work and influence in the civil rights arena, and we honor the man behind the deeds.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move SJR 18002.
Please continue.
I have a dream. Members, today we're going to commemorate the life of Martin Luther King, a man who fought for hope and healing in America. His legacy is one of courage, truth, dignity, humility, and service. On his holiday, we celebrate the values he was rooted in. Values of love, forgiveness, and nonviolence. Dr. King was a fearless leader who worked tirelessly to bring change to America. In America's society, He was inspired to nonviolent liberation and movements around the world. This holiday is a day to celebrate Dr. King's vision of a world without poverty, racism, war, and violence. He endured harassment, threats, and beatings. He was jailed over 29 times, but he still kept fighting for equality. His legacy shows us the power of unconditional love and nonviolence as a way to fight injustice. However, this holiday is twofold. It is also a call to action. Each year we celebrate the life of Martin Luther King and his legacy and his dream. We can't just celebrate this once a year. We have to live it. We have to live it every day in the values in our walk in life. We must continue to live the legacy by actively fighting against inequalities that exist today. Dr. King once said, life's most persistent and nagging question is, what are you doing for others? Right now, more than ever, we need to stand up, and we need to work towards bringing awareness to the inequalities that exist. We must work towards eliminating discrimination based upon skin color, sexual orientation, gender, or religion. We must live in a world without racist or vulgar comments, where everyone is accepted regardless of their origin. We must ensure people have access to quality health care and that every child is able to receive a quality education no matter what their zip code is. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is not only for celebration, but for remembrance, education, and tribute, but a call for us to use our voice and power to create a better world for those around us. In a world of growing polarization, we must come together and unite as one. We must look towards creating the world Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of. I have a dream.
Senator Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I was listening to this resolution, I found myself feeling actually really sad to think of how far we haven't come in the 55 years since the I Have a Dream speech. To think about the inequality we have in our prison system, in people being unjustifiably seen as a threat because of the color of their skin, and perhaps even being shot because of that. And so in reading his sentence, let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away. It has not in any shape, manner, or form passed away. And in listening once again to the historic speech, I am once again struck by his dream that one day his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, and at the same time read in the front page of our newspaper that our current president said that he wished we would accept more why would we accept more immigrants from Haiti and S-hole countries in Africa rather than places such as Norway? And it makes me ashamed to see the level of disrespect to people of color that still exists in this United States. And I hope that we as Colorado continue to do the great job we've done of not being reflective of this and work together and ensure that our policies here in our state are right and just. Thank you.
Senator Merrifield.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had no intention to speak today, so my words will probably not be as eloquent as I would wish that they would be. but I was remembering as I was standing at my desk that this is the 12th time that I have had the honor to be amongst the representatives and senators, the representatives of the people of Colorado in celebrating Martin Luther King Day. And I can remember when I was in the House, I can remember how proud I was as a newly elected state representative and standing for the Martin Luther King celebration and thinking how proud I was as a Coloradan and as a representative of Coloradans and as an American at how far we'd come and the progress that we'd made. And it was thrilling. And then last night I watched the news, and this morning I watched the speech, and I felt saddened. I felt shocked. I felt embarrassed. I think it's obvious from the comments that our president has made that, and astoundingly of those who've risen in defense of his comments, that we still have a long, long way to go. I think it's obvious that Dr. King's dream that he has still not been fulfilled. That his comments that all men are created equal is not believed by everyone in this country, and most astoundingly by the leader of our country. Dr. King called out Colorado in his speech. So I think it's vitally important that we Coloradans make it clear that we do not believe there are people or nations who come from shithole locations. That we believe, as Martin Luther King believes, that all men are created equal. And we will stand for that reasoning, for that belief, and we will not retreat. We will move forward to hope that someday we will accomplish Dr. King's dream.
Senator Crowder was next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since this day came up, I did some thinking about what I've actually experienced. I have the advantage to be old enough to remember a lot of what happened. And it's always amazed me what brings a man like Dr. Martin Luther King to the forefront to do what he did, to put himself in harm's way, to put himself in a firestorm, if you will. And what I did was I started writing down a few of the things that I do remember as a young man and what I witnessed and made an impact on me. January 1963, George Wallace in his inaugural address in Alabama, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. June 11, 1963, George Wallace standing in front of the door of the University of Alabama blocking Negro students' entry, which President Kennedy interceded with 400 National Guardsmen to break that up. June 12, 1963, Medgar Evers assassinated in Jackson, Mississippi. June 21, 64, James Chaney, Mississippi, Michael Swerner, New York, Andrew Goodman, Mississippi, were murdered as freedom civil rights workers in Mississippi. 1964, Cassius Clay proclaims that his name was of slave origin and changes it to Muhammad Ali. August 11th through 16th, 1965, the Watts riots in Los Angeles started over police profiling traffic stop that resulted in 34 deaths and $40 million in damages. These are some of the things that I remember observing, in my youth, and it just amazes me that Dr. King would go to the forefront of this. We just watched his dream speech in front of the Lincoln Monument. If you go down the steps, they have in the granite walk this is the place where Martin Luther King stood making that speech. So the history is abound. You know, and it's also impressive to me to come out of the first floor elevator and see Martin Luther King's picture up there alone. I think it should always be a point of reflection for us all to see what our times produced. And that was a great man in Martin Luther King, what he has done. You know, what he did was he always professed nonviolent protest, and I think some of his speeches even relate to that. And one of the speeches that I thought was one of his very best was his last, and that's the speech of the mountaintop. And that was April 3, 1968. And what this speech originated was in support of the Memphis sanitation workers' strike. He started out by stating, "We mean business now, and we are determined our rightful place in God's world." You know, what a statement that is. You know, we all are looking for that place in God's world, in equality. He goes on, he says, "I've been to the mountaintop. All we say to America is to be true to what you say on paper. Somewhere I read, freedom to assembly. Somewhere I read, freedom of speech. Somewhere I read, freedom of the press. And the best one I thought was somewhere I read, the greatness of America is ability to protest for rights." In that same speech, he almost prophesied his death, which happened the following day. You know, and in that speech, he stated longevity has its place, and although he would like to see a long life, and that's where if you listen to the speech carefully, after he says that, then he says that he fears no man, and that we would all see the promised land. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," is how he ended this speech. He was assassinated the next day. If you look back on our history, you can see the progress that we've made from the Civil War. It wasn't until 1907 that Charles Turner, a Negro, earned a PhD. He was the first one. That was in 1907. The second one came in 1912 when Carter Woodson to become the second to earn his PhD. It was 1950 when the American Medical Society accepted black members. It was 1952 when a black professor was tenured at University of California. In 2010, the National Science Foundation reports 2,221 black Americans earned a PhD. Progress is slow. Martin Luther King's tremendous contribution to this nation has and should be a reminder to us all the struggles of equality, not only of race, but of a country, and of all Americans should recognize and join the struggles that betters all mankind. Thank you.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank the Senate sponsors, Marble and Williams, for bringing this joint resolution today. And I take great pride to honor the legacy and life of Dr. Martin Luther King. So I understand the passion that was displayed by my good senator from Denver, because we understand that his life was cut short. We also understand the sacrifice that he made. He spent far too much time away from his family for a pursuit of justice and fairness for all. So I'm very thankful for what he has done to usher us to where we are today. When I think of the I Have a Dream speech, I think of myself. I think we are the dream, and I think that I am the dream. Because when I was growing up, I never in my lifetime imagined that I would be a senator. So I'm standing on the shoulders and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. He was a man that built bridges wherever he traveled. He walked with the poor, and he never wavered on his core values as they related to nonviolence and peace. I remember exactly where I was when that speech was delivered. I was in Baltimore, Maryland, living with my grandma and my mom because my dad was serving in Vietnam. And we watched the speech on a black and white TV. And I heard him deliver that speech, I Have a Dream. But I don't know if you know the backstory behind I Have a Dream speech, because Mahalia Jackson, she was a queen of gospel back in that time. She said, tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream. Because he was delivering a speech, and he wasn't going to tell people about the dream. And the piece of that dream speech that caught my heart, when he said exactly, I have to read it exactly the way it's written, because this is what I felt like he was speaking to me as a little girl at 10 years old. He says, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He was speaking to me. He was talking about an America that I could aspire and achieve my aspirations based on just who I am, despite the colors that you see on my cheek. He went on to talk about the little boys in Alabama, the boys and the girls would be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. He had a dream. And I felt like he was speaking directly to me and my potential and my promise. If Dr. King was alive today, he wouldn't be saying, let's make America great again. He would be saying, let's live up to the promise of what America could be. So today I say to all of you here, let's honor and remember Dr. Martin Luther King in what we do down here, in what we say down here, and what we teach. Martin Luther King said, and I'll close with this, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So colleagues, let's be the light in the world.
Senator Lundberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate this opportunity to stand up and in strong support of this resolution. And I also thank whoever came up with the idea of actually presenting Dr. King's most famous speech, because to listen to the man himself means a lot more than to listen to some observations about him. We have both. And that's appropriate, but I believe that in this day of looking back on a great American who did much for our nation and for individuals, that what he said is more important than what we say about what he said. He was a man who had great faith, and that faith gave him not only the courage to do what he did, but the confidence to understand that what he was doing was right. And I want to focus my words on that which will build up, not divide, and I trust that will be the debate from here on out. Martin Luther King was a man who tirelessly co-labored with God and men to win the struggle against segregation. He eventually took some satisfaction in being branded as an extremist, for this label placed him in the company of his Lord, and with the men throughout the ages whose lives have not only encouraged but inspired him. Now, for the words from Dr. King himself. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise, so help me God. And John Bunyan, I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. And Abraham Lincoln, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? Again, quoting from Dr. King, I am thankful to God that some noble souls from the ranks of organized religion have broken loose from the paralyzing chains of conformity and joined us as active partners in the struggle for freedom. They have acted in the faith that right defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. Abused and scorned as we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's destiny. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands.
Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you especially to the good senators who brought forward this important resolution today. As I ponder the deep and meaningful words that have been uttered by one of the greatest men to have ever lived, Dr. Martin Luther King, I take his message to be one of respect among us all. Respect for each other, regardless of the color of our skin, but based on the content of our character. And I see so many failings in our attempts to live up to that aspiration of respect for all of us, regardless of our superficial characteristics. And as I look around the nation which I proudly call my own, which I have chosen to be my own, not as a matter of birth, but as a matter of choice, which I love and respect and admire. And as I look around my country and I see the way we treat others with disrespect, my heart bleeds, and it bleeds all the more as I think about the dream that Dr. Martin Luther King expressed so eloquently that day back in 1968. The lack of respect we show for our poor, the lack of respect we show for our people of color, the lack of respect we show for our people who do the menial work that enables us all to live a dignified life. The lack of respect we show toward our janitors, our cleaners, our low-paid workers, our recipients of benefits whom we put through humiliation, our members of our community who have made mistakes which are violations of the criminal law and whom we then deliberately set about making their lives a continual process of humiliation for the rest of their lives. The lack of respect we show to the people who did not happen to be born in the right place, with the right manners, brought up with the right level of decorum. because they never got the chance. They never got the example. They weren't born in the right circumstances. And the level of superiority many of us feel toward our fellow Americans who did not have the advantages that we had, and the level of disrespect and maltreatment that we perpetrate against them who we feel are less worthy than ourselves. That level of disrespect is, to me, an integral part of Martin Luther King's dream that we shall rise above it. And I hope today that by listening again to those great inspiring words, that we think the respect that we owe to everyone in our society, regardless of their manners, regardless of their upbringing, regardless of whether we consider our behavior superior to theirs, our circumstances superior to theirs, our means to be superior to theirs, our wealth superior to theirs. They, like us, are human beings, and as our fellow human beings are worthy of respect. I take that message from Dr. Martin Luther King, and I hope that I will take that message into my work in this General Assembly and in my life as a father, as a husband, as a citizen. And I urge you to do the same. Thank you.
Senator Cook.
Thank you, Mr. President. I grew up in Arvada, and as such, I really didn't experience or see or understand the struggle or the injustice that was going on in other parts of this country until I went out east. My grandfather worked for the federal government. He worked for the Bureau of Mines, the Department of Interior, and he was living in Arlington, Virginia at the time, my grandparents. And we'd go out and see him all the time. And I remember going to the playground, and again, I was really young. I remember going to the playground and I'd see bathrooms that said whites and colored, or I'd see water fountains that said white or colored. And I didn't understand it because I was fairly young. As a matter of fact, I too was out in that area. I was in Arlington visiting with my grandparents in 1964 when this speech was going on. Again, I was really young. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand it. My grandparents had it on the TV, much the same, on a black and white TV, and I remember just watching the news and didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know what the argument was about until much later, until many years later, where I processed when I got older and when he was killed. Then I realized what the struggle and the fight was about. So, you know, our remembrances of the great Reverend would be incomplete without speaking of his incredible letter that he wrote from the Birmingham jail. Authored by Dr. King in 1964, while he was being detained, he answered the criticism against him by pastoral prayers from other Christian community. And, you know, I have to say I'm not always proud of the role law enforcement has taken throughout the years, through the Civil Rights March and through the whole crusade. Law enforcement has a lot to be culpable for back then, and this was one of the times. I understand he was in 29 times. I didn't realize that till today. So, like I said, I'm not always proud of the profession, and I hope to think that we've made great strides in that area. But anyway, on the letter, on reading the incredible letter, you're reminded by Dr. King's generational ties to the church. His grandfather and father were both Baptist ministers, as you all know. From this legacy came a high value he placed upon freedom and equality and the reasons why he bristled at injustice. When he heard the words liberty and justice for all, he heard a clarion call to righteous men everywhere to defend the least, the last, and the lost. In his letter, Dr. King reflected upon the lives of great men and women of character whose words and deeds stirred him a hope that one day, from every corner coffee shop and every courthouse across America, the sweet words of free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last, will ring out.
Senator Cort.
Thank you, Mr. President. I come down here to say one thing. My new daughter-in-law's family did not come from an S-hole country. Don't anybody ever suggest that. She is a proud American. Her family are proud Americans. And anyone who will suggest that she and her family are not equal to the rest of us is nobody in my book. And I hope we remember that with every bill we consider. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I first served down here, I had the honor of sitting very near on the House floor with Wilma Webb, who really helped me as a freshman learn this place. And we became good friends. And she was telling me the story about how the holiday came to be in Colorado. It was 1984, and she was pushing this issue along with Gloria Tanner, and in this house, Regis Groff, if I remember right. And Regis sat right over here somewhere. And Speaker Bledsoe wanted to put it on the ballot, which is almost certainly to fail. And so in the House, the bill came out that it would go to the ballot. Came to the Senate, they stripped that out. And then it went back to the House. And the normal mode there is you would concur with the Senate, and somebody else would make a motion to go to conference committee where she would lose and it would go to the ballot. And so she worked with Jerry Copel, who was a wizard on the rules. And she went up and was recognized by Speaker Bledsoe, and it was his idea again to put it on the ballot, and she made a motion to adhere, which people in, if you read Jerry Copel's book here, people in other fellow legislators say, no, Wilma, that's wrong. Then she was recognized again, and she made a motion to concur. And in the House, you've got to vote on those motions in order. And then she finally made the motion to concur with Senate amendments, so that it had to be the first vote. And they knew they had the votes for that. And because of a rule, her knowledge and Jerry's knowledge of the rules, we have a Martin Luther King holiday today. And there was a real persistence to getting that done. It just didn't happen. And I remember my first year here in 1987. Boy, I'm gray. I used to come over here and look in this body and go, this is a bunch of old people in the Senate, and here I am. In any case, my first year here, we had a Martin Luther King holiday, but we still met. But we locked the doors on this building. The People's House was locked on Martin Luther King Day. So I had never gone in to see Speaker Bledsoe, and I took it upon myself to do that and make the argument that the doors should be open, because that's what Martin was about. And I think he thought I was a crazy kid by the look on his face. He was a great poker player, though. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. But it was just the right thing to do, right? This is the People's House. So anyway, I just wanted to remind people that this wasn't a given. And this body changed that. And I want to thank our leadership and whoever decided, I think it was actually Chuck Berry, to give this a holiday off in response and to open up the building. Is the building open still? I hope so. We should have it open. So thanks Wilma, Gloria, Regis. I was proud to serve with you, and thanks for giving us the holiday, and thanks for the sponsors for reminding us about what this is about and how it applies to all of us.
Senator Priola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was delighted down here to be reminded by Senator Fields that Dr. King had 4 children, much like myself. So I feel like I can relate a bit to what his schedule was like. And there are many nights that my wife and I, now having a 2-year-old as well, wish that we could simply get into REM sleep so we could dream that night. But as many of you might know, we enjoy taking road trips. My wife and I did it when we dated, before we got married, and we continue to as our family. And I'm constantly delighted to see how many towns and cities across this country, from like the Dakotas to, of course, the coasts and all over the South, have the street Martin Luther King Boulevard. I see that name above any other name of folks who came before us in our nation's history. And it delights me just how diverse a mix of the towns and cities I see that are constantly reminded of the greatness of this man and what he did. But I want to speak a bit about his faith and the echoes in his philosophy that I see in my own faith of Catholicism. Dr. King was clear about the moral things of life and was unashamed to testify to them and to God, for whom he had believed that moral law comes. He was careful to do not only the right thing, but to do it for the right reason. And he placed the cause of which he had devoted himself into provincial hands of God. Dr. King ended his letter with these words: "One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values of our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep in the foundation. Founding fathers, in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their sincerity, beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Dr. Martin Luther King." Thank you for bringing this today.
Senator Neville.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I had the opportunity to grow up in the South, not the Deep South, in Florida. Florida was a different world, of course, in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, even in the 70s than it is now. But I also had the opportunity to work in the Deep South in 2006, 2007, 2008. The opportunity to work in Mississippi and Louisiana, to drive to work every day, going down Medgar Evers Boulevard to go to my office at that time, and to travel across the South. To say that there was no change is not true. To say that there is a long way to go is very true. But I'm also reminded of that when I would travel back to Colorado and see what was going on in Colorado. So the one thing I would suggest to all of us is that we not put ourselves on a pedestal and instead follow the advice of Dr. King and make sure that we're reaching out to everyone. It reminds me of what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said in the 1930s when he was looking at the scourge of Nazism and the rise of Stalinism and communism, crushing people, the injustices. And he reminded us, as a person of deep faith, and this is the important thing that Dr. King had, was tremendously deep faith. He put God ahead of everything, including understanding that we are all men and women and we all have feet of clay. So I'd always remind myself that before the Bible says before you remove the speck out of another's eye, you need to stop and remove the beam out of your own eye so that you can see more clearly. I think that's an important thing to remember. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, faith without works is dead religion. The important thing, and the thing that we're going to be judged on, in my opinion, we all have our own faith and our belief, but the real vote that's going to happen isn't in this chamber. The real vote is what happens when we meet our Lord and Creator, and we have to answer, not just for having faith, but for our works. Not just what we say or what we pontificate about, but for our works. And Dr. King was always true to that. He did both. You know, while it remains true that Christians themselves have not always flawlessly embodied the ideals of their faith, their impulse to promote by effort the principles of universal benevolence and pursuit of the public good has often wrought dramatic and positive change. And I believe we have had some dramatic and positive change, more to go. Now, in his letter from the Birmingham jail, Dr. King identified and discussed the Western Christian notion of liberty and justice. To this day, his words remind us of our intense responsibility to protect those eternal values, which is why I ask, can we properly honor him without also honoring the principles and ideals that inspired him? Because if we do not recognize that which inspired Dr. King, not only do we dishonor his life, but also his life's work and incredible goal. So consider this quote from Dr. King in that letter from this Birmingham jail cell. I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometown. And just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Let us hope that we take today's lessons and the opportunity, and I thank the sponsors for bringing this, and make sure that we go out, not by words, but by actual deeds, and actually take the point and take the responsibility to practice what we preach. It is so much more powerful than just words alone.
Senator Corum.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank the sponsors for bringing this resolution. I think it's very important that really realize that Dr. King talked about the principles that we should all live by. And, you know, I never had the opportunity growing up to have black friends. I lived in a small town in western Colorado. We had lots of Hispanics. They were friends. They were no different than any of us. We were no better or we were no worse, but we were friends. Most of the people that I went to school with, I am still friends with today. I have had their back for over 50 years, and they have had mine. And we lived by a principle that was a minister in Montrose. He also drove a school bus. He was a mentor for 1,000 kids in high school. And he said something that I think that was very important that we should all listen to. He talked about life. And his quote is on the gym at Montrose High School that is named after him. It says, when the one great score comes to mark against your name, he will not write that you won or lost, but how you played the game. And I think it is important that we in this body, as a nation, understand how we play the game. Quoting Dr. King, and his unlying love for justice led him to the address the characterization of his actions as untimely, as well as his critics' assertion that he and other demonstrators were willing to break laws. Listen to the answer Dr. King gave his detractors. This, wait, has always been meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that the justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men no longer willing to be plunged into the abysses of despair. Speaking to his critics, he said, "You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws." One may ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law of the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law, and any law that uplifts human personality is unjust. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust just because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. Hence, segregation is not only political, economically, and socially unsound, it is morally wrong and awful. Remember how you play the game. Thank you, sponsors.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Martinez-Humenick.
Thank you, Mr. President. To quote Dr. King, "Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely by the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God." From Dr. King's remarks, what are we to conclude about the foundations of freedom, of liberty, of civility, and of justice? That a man's keeping or breaking of any law is subject to his own views of that law, as to whether it is just or unjust? Or does Dr. King justify acts of civil disobedience based on the premise that supreme truth has been established by God and exists over and above man-made codes? It would be hard to argue that Dr. King thought anything other than that just law derives its authority from the divine. From my own personal experience, my father grew up in a small southeastern town, and there was a disparity, and the railroad tracks divided that community. I'm glad to see that today, in the 21st century, that we are trying in our communities to make sure that every person is welcome, that every person can go and get a haircut at any barber shop, and that every person can go and shop in the same stores. That has changed a great deal. We know that there's still some turmoil that is being discussed with the Supreme Court, but I grew up in Fort Collins, and growing up, we didn't have many black families when I was young. And then we had a family that moved in. He was a coach at the university. And I felt very bad because they were members of our Baptist church. When I would go to church and see that they would be the only people sitting in a pew at the church, when my upbringing was that we accepted everybody and we loved everybody the same. So I have to say, too, that, you know, depending on how people grow up and where they grow up may determine how they treat others. I'll give you just a short story. I went on a blind date when I was in college, and I hadn't been formally introduced to the young man. He had just been introduced to me as, "This is Beth." As the evening progressed, after we had had dinner, and we were going out to do some dancing, and this was country swing dancing, which I knew nothing about at that time. And this young man proceeded to tell me how much he hated Mexican people. And at that point in time, I proceeded to tell him that, you know, we need to be a little more open-minded, and we need to be acceptable. We need to accept people and not judge them simply because we have been wronged by one or two people. The small community that he had grown up in, he had been the minority in that community, and so he had been picked on. So his viewpoint was that all Mexicans were bad. Well, I have Mexican heritage. I have Aztec, Indian, and Spanish heritage. I also have European heritage. I'm a Heinz 57 person, and I think most of us are anymore. But what the moral of that story was is that he ended up talking to his father well into the early morning hours, 4 o'clock is what I was told, because he was so upset that I was very nice about it, and I just said, well, I need to tell you what my name is. I'm sorry that you feel that way. Please don't judge us all in the same manner just because of the way that you grew up and some of the things that happened. So I have chosen to try to not judge people, and I think that's one of the first things that we do. And children are not born with fear, we learn fear, and we shouldn't be fearful of others. We should get to know them first. So I appreciate the sponsors, and I am in support of Senate Joint Resolution 2, and I look forward to working together in a civil manner to continue on the work that we do in our efforts for freedom, liberty, and civility in the state of Colorado.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Hill.
Thanks, Mr. President, and colleagues. Thank you for bringing this important resolution. I've always been struck by in history how Europe wrestles with things many times before we do, and often that was the case in some civil rights issues. And Abraham Kuyper, Dutch politician, theologian, wrote this early in the 20th century, and I've just been inspired, I think, by how it reflects on what we've seen, not just through Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, but also the words that have been spoken here today and the passion with which they are spoken. He writes, "When the principles that run against your deepest convictions begin to win the day, then the battle is your calling, and peace has become sin. You must, at the price of dearest peace, lay your convictions bare before friend and enemy with all the fire of your faith." And as we honor the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think it's important not only that we rededicate ourselves to this idea, but continue to uphold it as we have done today, this idea of justice and liberty, principles that he so clearly demonstrated. And may God continue to bless the work of our hands as we strive for his dream and his vision. May it be ours as well.
Is there any further discussion? Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just was so happy when people were coming up and talking about their families and how blessed we are, so many of us, to have mixed families and to be able to every day live the principles of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I want to take this time and thank my family, my very wonderful, equally important family of Jew, Muslim, Christian, black, white, Mexican, Native American, and Chinese. I love you all.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your patience and all of your words to help us celebrate the life and the legacy of Martin Luther King.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. We renew our motion.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the adoption of Senate Joint Resolution 2. Are there any no votes? Seeing none, with a vote of 33 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 2 excused, Senate Joint Resolution 2 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Senator Williams. Okay. Senator 4. Senator Holbert. Senator Priola. Senator Smallwood. Senator Tate. Senator Lambert. Senator Lundberg. Senator Martinez-Humenick. Senator Coram. Senator Neville. Senator Cook. Senator Hill. Senator Baumgardner. Senator Sonnenberg. Senator Guzman. Senator Crowder. Senator Garcia. Senator Kafalis. Senator Fields. Senator Zenzinger. Senator Jones. Senator Moreno. Senator Kagan. Senator Donovan. Senator Court. Senator Kerr. Senator Fenberg. Senator John. Senator Merrifield. Senator Todd. Senator Aguilar. Please add the president. Mr. Carpenter, signing of bills.
The President has signed Senate Resolution 1.
Anything else? Announcements. Majority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, just to confirm, we will not be meeting Monday in observance of Martin Luther King Day. There have been questions about that, and I just want to confirm for you that we will not meet on Monday.
Senator Coram.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually have 2 announcements today. On January 16th, 4 to 6 p.m., Colorado Mesa University will have an event at the University Club from 4 to 6, so please attend that. Also, I don't know if you all remember, but it's stock show time. Come back up here. You can help me. I need all the help we can get. Because, you know, this is very important. Can you what? Yes, you can use campaign funds to make this. Thank you very much, Mr. Majority Leader. It is very important. You know, I've been told when I've talked to people about I don't have any farms in my district. Well, do you have a restaurant? Do you have a grocery store? You know, we've got to help educate these people so they feed us. A nation that cannot feed itself cannot defend itself. These are our leaders of tomorrow who are going to make sure that we, as a nation, rule as a nation that is just to all, lives by the principles that we talked about here today. And please help those young people. Roll out that check. We've got just a week to do it. So let's get it done. We actually have 4 days left. So bring your check on Tuesday. Thank you.
Senator Martinez-Humenick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder that the Joint Technology Committee will meet upon adjournment.
Senator Court.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want it noted that as when we were together in the House, Senator Quorum, Senator Baumgartner, Senator Sonnenberg, this Denver Democrat is one of the first ones to bring money to donate for the stock show.
Senator Williams, Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members, my colleague from Aurora and I would like to invite all of you to continue the celebration of Martin Luther King's life. We have an annual parade that occurs at City Park. We will step off at 9:45.
And the theme for this year's parade is Sacrifice for Justice. It's going to be Monday, January the 15th. And our Colorado parade is the largest in the nation. And we would love to see you there. I see so many of our federal delegations. I've seen you down there. Representative from the House and from the Senate will be there. So please join us on Monday at 9:45 at City Park. We parade and march down to the Civic Center Park. And the weather is expected to be warm. Thank you.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I want to get something on the calendar. You got a letter from the Water Education for Colorado group that used to be the Colorado Foundation for Water Education. We'll be having a meeting over lunch next Wednesday, the 17th, where we will have the opportunity to learn more about water with former Supreme Court Justice, author, water expert, Justice Gregory Hobbs. Just want to make sure I get that on your calendar. We'd look forward to having you join us. It'll be over in Legislative Services Building. I believe it's the room B over there, but love to have you join us over there. Thanks.
Any further announcements? Majority Leader Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will come in Tuesday morning and begin at 10 a.m. A couple members had questions whether it be 9 or 10, but we will convene at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. If you have your mileage verification forms, still please remember to complete those forms, turn them into the front desk. I believe we have talked about bill deadlines. Remember, today is an important day for getting that second and third bill into the hopper and up to the desk. I believe that is all of the announcements. And with that, Mr. President. Oh, excuse me. Oh, okay. 1:30 or? Members, I've just been informed that we will have some bills to read over later today, so we will not adjourn, but recess. You will not need to be here. You're certainly welcome. With that, Mr. President, I move the Senate stand in recess until 1:30 p.m. today.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. The Senate will stand in recess till 1:30 p.m. today.